In this lesson, we'll be talking about the chain of custody. So what is the chain of custody? Well, the chain of custody is really a documentation trail. It covers who has a particular piece of evidence and when they had it. So the chain of custody has to be a complete record of all of the people who have handled a particular piece of evidence and when it was handed over. And that includes things like signatures for handoff and dates and times and people. All of that's got to be complete and accurate for when you go to trial, because the chain of custody is going to be looked at. And if there's any gap in the chain of custody, it calls the evidence into question as to whether it's authentic or whether it's been tampered with or not. So all transfers of evidence between one person and another must be documented. The documentation, of course, should be complete and accurate. So anytime there is a transfer from one person to another for whatever reason, that transfer has to be documented and included with the evidence as part of the chain of custody. It should be provable that evidence was not accessible to anyone else, which means if you've got a piece of evidence, you have to have the ability to secure it some way so nobody can gain access to it other than you or within your supervision. Evidence must be proven to be not tampered with, so you have to be able to show that the evidence hasn't been manipulated or tampered with in any way. Otherwise, that evidence gets called into question in terms of its veracity, authenticity, and accuracy. If any of those is questionable, that evidence is, of course, of no good to the legal proceeding that is underway. Some guidelines about chain of custody. You should plan to protect evidence before you get it. Don't get a piece of evidence and then start thinking about what you're going to do with it. If you've been asked to be a forensic investigator in some fashion or another before you even touch a piece of evidence, you should have a plan for how you're going to protect that evidence and keep it safe from being tampered with or manipulated. And you should be able to prove what that plan is and demonstrate that plan so it's clear and verifiable that the evidence was not tampered with and could not have been tampered with. In the case of computer forensics, we have the ability to do things like make copies of evidence in a lot of cases because what we're dealing with is digital data. And with digital data, you can easily make copies. So as you are going through your investigation, do your work on a copy of the evidence rather than the evidence directly. That protects you from a case where inadvertently you do a write onto a piece of evidence. In other words, you alter it or manipulate it where you didn't mean to. Mistakes happen sometimes. And so protect yourself against those mistakes by not damaging the original evidence. So you should always work on a copy of the original as you're going through your investigation. You should always closely guard evidence. It should always be in your sight when it's being worked on. If it's not being worked on, it should be secured somewhere where nobody can gain access to it other than those who have been authorized to work on it directly, and those people should be part of the chain of custody. Keep your chain of custody up to date and accurate, and by the chain of custody in this case, talking specifically about the documentation that is the chain of custody. Also, don't keep evidence longer than necessary. There's a balancing act here because you also don't want to be accused of destroying evidence if there is a court case that's either in progress or maybe pending. So you want to make sure that you keep evidence as long as you need to. So in conclusion, documentation is critical. You must have the chain of custody documentation complete and accurate. Evidence should be provably not tampered with, so you should have a way to secure the evidence when it's not being worked on, and it should always be in your sight and in your possession when it is being worked on, and I don't mean specifically in your hands, it must be in your possession somehow, whether you're working on it or whether you've got it secured somewhere. It must be in the hands of an identified and documented person. That excludes people who are not documented. If anybody else has their hands on the evidence, it's in their possession for a period of time, they should become part of the chain of custody, and they should be added to the documentation that is the chain of custody. So that's the chain of custody and its importance as part of the expectations of somebody involved with computer forensics.